progressing, and also to let
Welcome to the Prophecy Chronicles with your host, Paul Richard Price.
Edition of the Prophecy Chronicles radio show. My guest tonight for all of you in New Orleans and around the Gulf, my guest tonight is Pastor Lindsey Williams. He is the author of the book, The Energy Non-Crisis, was the chaplain for a major oil company back in the 70s, has his contacts, and will tell us a little bit tonight about what he has heard. The greatest fear is that this Gulf oil leak will lead to. What kind of catastrophe will occur? And for all of you listening at 105.5 FM in New Orleans, I'd like to thank you again for listening to the show tonight, and tell everybody you've heard that if they don't hear it tonight on the show, live, have them listen to it on the archives afterwards at paranormalradionetwork.org. We need as many people in the Gulf from Louisiana to Florida and beyond to listen to this show tonight. So if you would, please welcome my guest, Pastor Lindsey Williams. And Pastor Lindsey, how are you doing today?
Paul, thank you so much for allowing me the privilege to be on your show tonight, and especially those down in New Orleans. I feel it an honor to be able to come into your home by way of your radio in order to tell you the real story of what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster with BP. Now, Paul, I think it'd be good, since I've got a lot of new listeners out there, people I've not contacted or have heard me before, let me just give them a brief background, because some of the things I'm going to say on this show are so startling that unless they know why I know this material, it'll be very difficult to believe. It all began with me many years ago when I was a missionary in the state of Alaska. I'd gone there as an aviation missionary, and just after arriving in the state, they said they were going to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. They also said that there were going to be 25,000 pipeliners to converge on the state of Alaska to build that 4-foot diameter biggest pipe ever constructed on the face of the earth for the carrying of crude oil at that time, 800 miles across the state of Alaska from the Arctic Ocean and America's oil field, and 25,000 of the roughest, toughest, cussingest, drinkingest, onerous folks on the face of the earth, pipeliners. And the first thing that came to my mind was, those men must need some spiritual guidance. Well, believe me, that was the understatement of the year. So I went to Alaska Pipeline Service Company. That was a consortium of 9 major oil companies that were going to build that pipeline, and I said, don't you need a chaplain on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline? At first they laughed at me. I kept going back and back. They'd never had a chaplain on a pipeline before. And so finally they said, okay, we'll give you the northern part of the pipeline up at Prudhoe Bay where the big oil field is. Just go up there and see what you can do. Well, I did. And about 6 months later, Alaska Pipeline Service Company came to me and said, Chaplain, we never knew the value of a minister on a pipeline before. They said, you're saving us thousands of dollars of counseling fees, and you're helping the atmosphere and working conditions of the men in the camps. And they said, we would like to offer you executive status. Now, I said, what do you mean executive status? They said, well, go any place you'd like to go, see anything you want to see. We'll give you an executive pass. You can stay in the dorms with the executives. And they said, we'd like to invite you to sit in on our board meetings in an advisory capacity in order to help the relationship between management and labor. Paul, I had not the slightest idea what I was getting into. For 3 years, I lived with the elite of the world. Yes, this could have only happened by the providence of God. There is no way that you could get to know the people that you hear about in the World Bank and the IMF and the top oil company officials of the world except by the providence of God. And here is a little insignificant, unknown missionary from out in the bush of Alaska sitting with the elite of the world for 3 years' time. And, Paul, it changed my life. I think I can say emphatically to everyone out there in the listening audience, there positively is a group of people on the face of the earth who control the world. They tell the president what to do. They dictate to Congress what bills to pass. They tell the Arabs what they're going to give OPEC for a barrel of oil in any given day, and they control the currencies of the world. I know. I sat and listened to them talk about it. Well, here we are 35 years later, and the big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. But you see, over these past 35 years since the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, I have kept in touch with many of those people that I got to know up there. I call them on the phone on a regular basis. I have the phone numbers of two of the elite of the world that I can pick up and call anytime I wish. Well, about a month after the big oil fiasco in the Gulf of Mexico, I decided one day it's time to know the real story. I'm tired of hearing what the media is saying. You can't believe anything that BP says. I think I'll find out what the real story of the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster is. And I picked up the telephone and called one of the people who knows everything that goes on behind closed doors. He is a lifelong oil man. He is a man who is retired from Atlantic Richfield. He knows exactly what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico, and he told me. Well, Paul, that brings me down to what I'm going to say tonight. What you hear on this program is the real story, the truth, the honest story. It may not be what you've heard on the media, and it definitely won't be what they want you to know. But you're going to hear it from, first of all, one of the elite of the world. Then he put me in touch with two management personnel with BP. You heard me correctly. There are some people with British Petroleum who are so concerned about what's happening to people. People's lives are at stake, and the average person has not the slightest idea how dangerous this thing is in the Gulf of Mexico. And this individual put me in touch with two management personnel of BP who were willing to tell the real story of what happened out there. Then I was able to get in touch with a gentleman who actually worked on the BP rig prior to the time that the well blew and the rig went to the bottom of the ocean. And I put together all this information in the truth, the real story of what is happening in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, Paul, in order to be able to help people understand just what happened out there, I need to go back a ways and tell you where it all began. Because this didn't just begin with the Gulf of Mexico. This goes back a long ways further than that. You see, it all began back in 1970. The Russians, in 1970, drilled the first super deep well ever on the face of the earth. They called it Kola SG-3. They went down to 40,230 feet. Since then, Russia has drilled 310 of these very super deep wells successfully, and as a result, last year Russia overtook Saudi Arabia as the world's biggest single oil producer, and now it will dominate global oil production sales for the next century. Now, BP decided they wanted to get in on this. Now, there had never been a super deep well drilled in the ocean. Never. Russia drilled all on land. And what did they find when they got down there to 40,230 feet? Russia found abiotic oil. Now, folks, I'm going to use some very technical terms. I hope you have a pencil and paper, because you're going to hear some things tonight that unless you talk with a person who is in the know in the oil business, you probably would not get this. When Russia went down and drilled their super deep wells to 40,230 feet, they found abiotic oil. They did not find fossil fuel. Now, for years and years, you've heard the word fossil fuel. That means rotted trees and plants and animals that are in the ground. They decayed, and they said that's where the oil came from. Well, Russia didn't find that, because there are no rotted trees and plants and animals at 40,230 feet. Instead, they found abiotic oil. It had a different chemical consistency, and they're going to have to rewrite the textbooks on crude oil, because now they have come to realize that these super deep oil pools, where these super deep wells were drilled, these huge, monstrous oil finds, oil is actually being created in the heart of the earth by some chemical process extremely deep, and they don't even know what the process is. All they know is that it's being done, and then these super deep oil fields are seeping oil up into the shallow oil fields, such as Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Mexico, many oil fields in America, the North Slope of Alaska. Peak oil is a total misnomer because there is no shortage whatsoever. Now, that's what Russia had done back in 1970. Now, let's come down to where we are today. BP Oil Company decided they wanted to get in on the profits that Russia had gotten in on, so they went to the United States government and they said, we would like to drill a super deep oil well in the Gulf of Mexico. Nobody had ever done this. It had never been tried in water before, only on land. Now, Russia had sense enough, and please, notice my words. When I found out what I found out from the elite of the world, and top oil company officials gave me this information, I was so dumbfounded until I'm going to have to be very honest and frank with you in the course of my conversation tonight. Russia had sense enough to drill their Kola SG3 wells to over 40,000 feet on land. Now in the Gulf of Mexico, and I cannot at all sympathize with the United States government or BP, because they were warned, certain scientists, that they should not do this in the water. They said the scientists had warned them a year ago. You don't know what you're going to find down there. You do not know what the pressures of that oil field are going to be. You've never drilled a super deep well in an ocean before. And BP attempting, so stupid. I mean, the United States government issued the permits to BP to drill this well. They should have never done it. They were warned by the scientists that it should not happen and they should not allow it. But BP drilled a super deep oil well in the Gulf of Mexico. It was stupid, and the government of the United States of America is just as much blame in this situation as BP is, because the government was warned and BP was warned by certain scientists, you should not drill this well in ocean water. But they did, and they drilled it off of a floating platform. Now, most oil platforms that the oil companies drill off of are anchored to the bottom of the ocean. That was not the case with this well. This was a floating platform that its position was controlled by sophisticated GPS equipment and was kept in place while they drilled in 5,000 feet deep water. Now, folks, are you realizing this? That a mile is 5,280 feet. The ocean water in the Gulf of Mexico, where BP drilled, was almost 1 mile deep of water alone before they could begin drilling in the ocean floor. And they drilled. Are you ready? I hope you're writing these figures down. You need this. You're going to hear it come out in investigations that are done by government. It's going to be so embarrassing you can't imagine it. But here it is. It's coming right from the elite, the top oil men of the world that told me these things because of my friendship with them over the years. And BP drilled 30,000 feet deep in the bottom of the ocean. That is from ocean depth. Now, not the top of the water. It was 5,000 feet of water. And then they drilled 30,000 feet into the ocean itself. This is literally on the edge of human technology. No one has ever done this before in ocean water. They hit something so catastrophic and unexpected that they could not contain it. Now, folks, I'm going to say very frankly right now, this was a mistake. First of all, they've been warned not to do it. This was not intentional. I know some of you have been told, and you might think this or that. I'm trying to tell you the real story of what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not. This doesn't come off the web. You're not getting this from some think so, hope so, or possibly could be. This is coming from the elite that talk behind closed doors and are willing to tell me these things. And BP at 30,000 feet, they hit a strata of oil at such high pressure that it burst every safety valve. It blew holes in the pipe. It blew up the rig that they'd been drilling off of. No oil rig ever, no drilling company ever, no oil company on the face of this earth. Russia, never in their super deep wells, they never hit any pressure like this. Just a moment, too. I'm going to tell you the pressure that they hit. They've been willing to give it to me. BP hit a pressure that was so high that it destroyed the maximum efforts of human science to contain it. Every single safety valve blew. It blew up the drill rig. It sank it to the ocean. It killed people. No oil company has ever hit any pressure like this. Now, before I give you the pressure that BP hit in the Gulf of Mexico, and whenever I give it to you, you'll understand why they can't stop it. I'm giving you some honest answers today as to what you can expect in the future out of the Gulf of Mexico, and you're going to be startled, especially you who are around the Gulf. Okay, first of all, let me go back and give a little background, and then you be ready with pencils and paper to write down the pressure that was on the well head when BP drilled through the strata of granite rock and went into that oil pool. First of all, when I was at Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, on America's oil field in northern Alaska on the Arctic Ocean, and was the chaplain for the elite for 3 years' time, I had the opportunity to watch them bring in many oil wells. And when a new oil well was brought in, they would always give two things immediately. Number one, they would tell you the flow rate of the well. Please write these words down. They would tell you the flow rate. That means they would open up all of the valves, they would let the oil flow for a period of time, and they would tell you exactly how many barrels of oil would flow in an hour or in a 24-hour day. The second thing that they always gave when they brought in a new well, they would tell you the pressure at the well head. Now, I hope you're getting these words again. At the well head. Now, where is the well head? At 5,000 feet of water in the Gulf of Mexico, the wellhead is at the bottom of the ocean, not counting that 5,000 feet. You got to deal with differential pressure here. But the wellhead pressure in the Gulf of Mexico, let me compare it to something. At Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, nearly every well up there had approximately 1,500 pounds per square inch. They call it PSI of oil pressure. That means it's artesian. Whenever they opened the valve at Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, they had 1,500 pounds per square inch of artesian pressure that came out of that ground. Now let's compare this to something else so that you can understand what BP hit. An automobile tire that you drive on is approximately 35 pounds per square inch, PSI. A big truck, tandem tractor trailer rig, they usually carry 100 to 110 pounds per square inch, PSI of air pressure. Now, are you ready? I hope you're sitting down. This you're going to find startling. It'll come out eventually. Do you realize that nobody, the national media, the United States government, BP, have you noticed that nobody, positively nobody, is telling you the wellhead pressure of that well in the Gulf of Mexico? I mean, isn't it strange that this is one of the first things they ever do with a well when they bring? I mean, you folks who in the oil business, you'll understand. You readily understand what I'm talking about right now. Now, when BP drilled in 5,000 foot water, then they drilled 30,000 feet They drilled through sand. They drilled through granite rock. And when they went through that granite cap that was on the top of this oil pool, I am told that they hit, are you ready? I hope you write this down. They hit wellhead pressure of 40,000 psi, pounds per square inch. This is beyond human technology to contain it. There is no such thing as a safety valve that could have held that. Now, there are many safety devices in the well. It blew them all. BP couldn't control it. There was nothing they could do about it. There's one valve. Now, you oil men especially, you'll recognize this one. There's one valve that always holds when everything else blows. It's called a fail-safe valve, F-A-I-L-S-A-F-E valve. The fail-safe valve is supposed to take any pressure known to humankind. Well, this was beyond that. This had a pressure of 40,000 psi, and it was beyond anything that the government, that BP, or anyone else could have possibly contained. The Gulf of Mexico oil well, it is beyond the imagination of anybody in the oil business. And now that well is flowing approximately, or has been flowing since the day it blew, approximately 125,000 barrels. Now, I didn't say gallons. I know what the national media said originally. Then they've revised it over and over and over. Matt Simmons, who is a lifelong oil man of 25 years, very highly respected in the oil industry, he said recently that that well has been flowing 125,000 barrels a day, and it will continue to do that because they have tried every method possible to contain that well, and they cannot do it. Do you realize what they put in the bottom of the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico? They put in a pipe that is 4 inches thick of hardened steel. It is 20 inches in diameter. Now, coming up out of that oil, out of that pipe, when 40,000 pounds per square inch hit it, it blew holes in it. It blew holes in it, no telling how many different times. Not only that, but they have just stated within the past week's time. It took them nearly 3 months, to be honest, with the American people. But just this past week, the media actually came out and stated, we have a problem. The granite strata of rock that they went through in order to penetrate into that oil pool, they said that strata is cracked. And oil is coming up in many different places, not just out of the pipe. The pipe itself was perforated in many spots, more than likely, and they have oil spouts coming up as far as 20 miles away, and they cannot stop it. Well, at this point, when this oil man was telling me these things, in fact, when all three of them told me these things, I was dumbfounded. And the first question I asked him was, is there ever any hope whatsoever of stopping this oil flow in the Gulf of Mexico? My authorities said to me, Chaplain, there's only one hope left. I said, what's that? He said, just above that granite strata is sand. He said, if we can get a nuclear device to liquefy that sand, to congeal it, or some other type of a neutron device or nuclear device, then he said we might be able to stop the flow of that oil. I said, what do you mean might? Now, folks, I'm going to admit to you, I heard fear in the voice of this elite oil company official with the rest of what he had to say. He said, Chaplain, we hope we can stop that oil with a nuclear device. I said, what do you mean we hope? He said, first of all, we've got to angle drill down to a certain depth in order to be able to even plant the nuclear device. He said, when we get there, it's going to take months to do it. Do you realize how far into this Gulf of Mexico oil disaster we are, with 125,000 barrels a day being dumped into the Gulf of Mexico? I mean, this is a catastrophe of such monumental proportion that the world has never seen anything like this before. And yet, the average person just seems to think it's some little fantasy out there somewhere. He said to me, Chaplain, if we succeed with a nuclear device, he said, we are going to be the heroes of the world. He said, if we don't succeed, and he said, we rupture that strata even further, he said, Chaplain, that oil will not be stopped. And he said, it will flow for up to 30 years. Now, Paul, I know I've been doing a lot of talking here. I got a lot to say. I've just begun. But maybe there's some things that you need to ask before I go any further with giving you more technical details.
Okay, well, yeah, we have a few questions from in the chat room dealing with this particular situation, and a lot of people want to know, and if you'll allow me just enough time to ask at least 3 different questions, Pastor Williams, we can get to the point here. First of all, is any of this information on your website?
Yes, I have prepared a documentary on this. I was so appalled at what I heard and what we've been told by the media and by the government, which is not true, until I decided I had to prepare a documentary on this, and I did. Now, here's the phone number, and you'll also find it talked about on my website. Now, for those of you who have heard me before on the radio or have read any of my books, I'm the author of 6 books and have dealt with the elite and their mindset in all of these materials. Some of you will know that about 2 years ago, one of the elitists of the world called me on the phone. I knew him. I know him well. I spent hours and days with him at Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. And he called me on the phone, and he was mad. Oh, he said, Chaplain, you're telling too much. You're saying things that we can't have said. You're going to have to quit this. Or he said, if you don't quit saying certain things, we're going to have to do this and this and this and this. And John F. Kennedy argued with these people, and he was President of the United States of America. And you know what they did to him. Well, I wasn't about to argue with them. And one of the things that they required me to do 2 years ago was close down my website. I had a website in which I was telling intricate details of the elite and what they were saying behind closed doors. And they made me close my website down. So the only thing I have at this point is the documentary that I have prepared on the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster. It's really contained in 6 DVDs, which tells you everything that the elite are going to do between now and 2012. You heard me correctly. You can put them beside your calendar and mark them off month after month as it takes place. One of the elite, 87-year-old gentleman, who is not very well, and he said to me a while back, he said, Chaplain, I'm too old to care. Just tell the world everything. And he told me some of the inside information of what the elite are doing in banking, what's going to happen to your Social Security, what's going to take place with the dollar, how they're going to use this Gulf of Mexico oil disaster to help them fulfill their timeline by 2012. And I've produced all of this on 6 DVDs and a CD documentary on the Gulf of Mexico. If you'd like to get this, you can go on the web to prophecyclub.com. That's prophecyclub.com. Or if you'd like to call one of our toll-free operators on tomorrow, you can. The number toll-free is 888-799-6111. Or, yet tonight, if you wish, you can go on the web to prophecyclub.com. Be sure and spell prophecy with a C. prophecyclub.com, or our toll-free number, 888-799-6111. Paul?
Okay, and I have a couple of other questions that were asked. Number one, Rydell in the chat room wanted me to ask you this. Was the warnings about the drilling simply ignored by BP for profit?
Positively. The United States government issued the permits. BP could have never drilled this well without the United States government approval. The government, Department of Energy, and others who issued these permits had been warned by the scientists. Don't do it. You don't know what you might hit. There is no precedence for this. We have no computer models to go by. You do not know what will happen. BP went ahead and drilled anyway using conventional equipment incapable of handling the extreme pressure of 40,000 pounds per square inch, and they drilled it anyway. They also made some mistakes in the process of that drilling. The fail-safe valve had been warped in the process of drilling, and they did not replace it. And I'm going to be very honest with your person in the chat room right now. I will give the answer this way. They do not want to stop this well. Now, I know this sounds startling, but you got to understand what I'm talking about here. Keep in mind that BP has hit the mother lobe of all oil pools, even Russia. Never hit anything like this. Now, if you were a gold miner, you would always be looking for that one gold strike that would make you super rich overnight. They call it mother lobe. Well, if you were an oil man drilling into an oil pool, you would want to hit the highest pressure, the biggest oil field that you could possibly hit, and that is exactly what BP hit. They know they can't stop that oil. They don't want to stop that oil. And I'm going to tell you the dangers. You see the oil coming out of that well in the Gulf of Mexico. I know that it's kind of a reddish color there. Most oil fields have black oil. That one has kind of a reddish color to it. The oil coming out of that well is not the most dangerous part. I mean, yeah, really, when I get into technical details here in a moment or two, you're going to be amazed. But they could have stopped that oil from flowing a long time ago. All it would have taken was either a neutron or a nuclear device. They don't want to do it. Why? BP knows that public sentiment right now is against any more super deep, be sure and notice these words, is against any more super deep oil wells being drilled. And they know that they will never be able to go in there and drill another well, super deep well, in the Gulf of Mexico. The government nor the people would ever allow it. The president couldn't possibly do it. Or he definitely would never get elected again. Well, I won't go into that subject right now. But they know, therefore, BP, at any cost, they don't care about life. Nothing matters to them. The ocean creatures, what happens to the Gulf of Mexico, the lifelong occupations of the fishermen and the tourist industry, they could care less. The only thing BP wants to do is to harness this well. Did you hear me? They want to harness this well and bring it in somehow. So far, they've not been able to do it, and they want to make millions off of it. They could care less about human life. They could care less about the Gulf of Mexico. They want to be able to bring this well in somehow, and they will continue to contaminate that Gulf as long as necessary. They don't want the well destroyed, and they don't want to stop it. Instead, they want to bring it in and make a fortune off of it. Paul?
Well, and I have a few other questions. First of all, a lot of people are questioning, they're asking why, if the elite had warned you beforehand, why are they allowing you now to release the DVDs without repercussion?
There are some things that I still cannot say. There are some things that the elite won't let me say. And they tell me what they won't allow said. You have to keep in mind who gave me this particular information about the Gulf of Mexico. I have the personal phone number of two of the elitists of the world who talk with me. I could pick up the telephone anytime and give them a call. One of them was so concerned about what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico that he was willing to give me this information. He is a retired individual, and he did it at his own, well, anyway, it was very interesting that he would be willing to give me all these things. But I will say this. There are some things that they have told me, Chaplain, don't you dare say, if you do, you're in trouble. So I'm giving you the ultimate of everything that I can give. Now, I know some of you will say, well, how do you know that these people aren't misleading you? Maybe they're lying to you about the Gulf of Mexico. Well, let me put it this way, and Paul, you know my track record. Over 35 years, every time the elite would tell me something, I go to the radio talk shows all over America, and I've told it. Not one single time in 35 years have these two elite that I confide in, that they confide in me because of their merely because, how should I put it? They're in admiration for me giving 3 years of my life on the oil field and probably being the only minister that these people have ever known of that type. I mean, you just don't get to know the elite. But I was on their oil field. They were not coming to my church. And because of their admiration for what I did back in those days, they tell me certain things, and I give them, and never one time in 35 years have they ever told me anything that was not true. Now, not only did I get this from one of these elite, but some of the management personnel of BP are so concerned about human beings and the Gulf that they were willing to talk and tell me some things also. And everything that this elitist and the people with BP told me, everything was exactly the same.
So, and one thing I want to bring up to my listeners, that you have been right in the past. Your track record is 100% accurate. And it's not anything that you've heard yourself. It's information you've got from leading elitists. And are any of these elitists, Pastor Williams, Illuminati in the strictest sense of the word?
Well, you have to, I want to stick, if I can, with the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster tonight, but yes, I'll try to answer this question if I can. You have to understand who the elitists are. The elitists start out with a very inner core group of probably 12 people, and no more. And then from that point down, you go into many different groups. You go into such things as the Illuminati, you go into the Council of Foreign Relations, you go into the Trilateral Commission, on and on you go. Then you go down to a much larger group, which is the media nationwide. Now understand that this very top group of maybe 12 people, they know everything. Everything is planned behind closed doors. Nothing ever happens by chance. In government, in monetary, in banking, they planned this years and years ago. The recession we're having right now. I warned people about this years ago, that the elite already have it planned. I put out DVDs telling this years before it happened, and people back in those days laughed at me and said, "You're crazy. This can't take place in America." I said, "It's going to. The elite have already told me they've got it planned, every single bit of it. And on my 6 DVDs, I tell everything that the elite are doing." Now, you've got to consider where the elite are that you get your information from. It may be amongst this very top 12. It may be a little further down the ladder. And the further down the ladder you go, they know less, but yet the group is bigger. And then it finally comes down to the national media and so on, where you have a very large group, but they know very little and say just exactly what they're told. So, unless you have some other questions there, let's get back to the Gulf of Mexico if we can.
Well, I have one more question that I'll go in, and I was waiting for this to be the last one. They brought up the fact that Rydell in the chat room brought up the fact about what is next, and then there was talk about methane over Miami. So let's go ahead and get into that portion of it if you would like to.
Now, keep in mind that what comes out of an oil well is not just oil. Most people think that an oil well spouts oil. Well, yes, it does. But that's not the only thing it spouts. And let me give you an example. At Prudhoe Bay, and then I'll come down to the Gulf, by the way, and give you the technical details, so please have that pencil and paper ready. You've got to write down the technical details I'll give you in a few moments. Let's take, for instance, the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster, and let's compare it to Prudhoe Bay. At Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, there came out of the ground with the oil gases. Now, out of every oil well, there are certain gases that come out of that oil well. Not just oil, but many other things comes out of that well too. Now, at Prudhoe Bay, they had, you know what size a 747 aircraft is? You know the size of the engines. A person can stand up in the intake of the engine of a 747 aircraft. It's so large. At Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, they had 7 747-type jet aircraft engines adapted for the purpose of pumping the gases that came up out of the Prudhoe Bay oil wells and pumping some water back into the field in order to maintain the pressure of the field. But it took 7 747-type jet aircraft engines running 24 hours a day to pump that jet back in. Now, let's go to the Gulf of Mexico. In the Gulf of Mexico, that oil is not being filtered. Those gases are coming out of that well and are everywhere all over the Gulf of Mexico. And not only that, but with that pipe being perforated and with there being fissures in the granite rock, they have spouts coming up 20 miles away where it has found its way to the surface. Now, Senator Bill Nelson, he's a Democrat from Florida. Now, you go look this up for yourself. Don't just take my word for these things. I'm giving documentation for everything I'm saying tonight. Senator Bill Nelson, Democrat from Florida, appeared on MSNBC on June the 9th of this year with Andrea Mitchell. And on the program, he said, oil is seeping up from the seabed. It is not just coming up from the pipe. Now, that pipe was 2 inches thick when BP put it in the bottom of the ocean, and it was 20 inches in diameter. Now, this is something that you'll not be getting from the media. That pipe has already eroded, are you hearing this? 40,000 pounds per square inch of pressure coming out of that pipe 24 hours a day with the gases, with all of the abrasives, sandpaper type things that are coming out through that pipe at 40,000 pounds per square inch. That pipe has already eroded to 1 inch thick. Folks, do you realize that by the time they angle drilled down to attempt to plant a nuclear device, that pipe probably will have disintegrated in the bottom of the ocean because of the extreme pressure that pipe, that the substance in that pipe with all of its gases and abrasive oils and sandpaper-type materials that are coming up out of it. We have a disaster here that is so unbelievable nearly. Okay, let me go into what's coming up out of the bottom of the ocean. Just recently, so many people had told the government, we've got to know what's happening out there. So the EPA, you can go right on their website and find this for yourself. At least it was there a number of weeks ago. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, went into the Gulf and they tested, please write this down, volatile organic compounds that are in the air in the Gulf of Mexico. That is, the gases, toxic, flammable, that are coming out of that well, not being pumped back into the field. They're being allowed to go into the atmosphere. And they tested, the EPA did, and published their testing of the volatile organic compounds that are in the air in the Gulf of Mexico. Here they are. Hydrogen sulfide. Now, I'm going to give you two things. I'm going to give you the allowable limits for a human being to come in contact with of these substances that the EPA published that are in the atmosphere in the Gulf of Mexico. The first one was hydrogen sulfide, and the EPA says that a human being is allowed to breathe or come in contact with 5 to 10 parts per billion. Please write this down. ppb as in boy. Allowable limits, 5 to 10 parts per billion of hydrogen sulfide. Anything above that could be deadly and dangerous, and the EPA just tested current levels in the Gulf of Mexico, 1,200 parts per billion of hydrogen sulfide. The next one that they will finally it took nearly 3 months to tell people this. Why weren't they honest with people? Back down to 2 months ago. What's our government supposed to be doing? I mean, aren't we supposed to be protected by these things? After all, they gave the permits to BP to drill these wells. Why did it take them 3 months to tell the people what's happening to them? The next one, they found benzene. Oh, my goodness. I hope this frightens you. Benzene is toxic. Benzene is a carcinogen. It forms cancer. The safe levels, benzene is so dangerous that the allowable limits of benzene, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, that you can breathe is 0. That's how dangerous it is. 0 to 4 parts per billion. Now I'm going to give you the figure that they found when they tested it the other day. They have tested in the Gulf of Mexico 3,000 parts per billion of benzene in the atmosphere in the Gulf of Mexico. I want to read you what benzene does. Here it is, right from their own report. Exposure to low levels of benzene can cause dizziness, drowsiness, headaches, confusion, tremors, rapid heartbeat, and unconsciousness. Long-term exposure to benzene can damage the bone marrow, lead to blood problems like leukemia. It also weakens the immune system and targets the organs such as the kidneys, the lungs, the liver, and the brain. Do you realize that everybody along the Gulf of Mexico and in Florida are breathing these toxic substances that are so deadly? I mean, there is no health care system on the face of this earth that will be rich enough to take care of the physical problems that are going to develop just because of the toxins in the air and in the water in the Gulf of Mexico, the birth defects that are going to take place as a result of this. This is going to be so catastrophic, it's frightening. I'll give you the next substance. The next substance is methylene chloride. And the Environmental Protection Agency says that you are allowed to come in contact with 61 parts per billion of methylene chloride before it harms you. They have tested in the Gulf of Mexico 3,000 to 3,400 parts per billion of methylene chloride. Folks, you are breathing this stuff. Oh, I have had some of the most unusual conversations lately. I had a talk show host out of Orlando, Florida, call me the other day. And he said, Chaplain, I woke up the other morning. He said, I've got lung problems. He said, I don't know what's happening to me. He said, for the past 3 days, I've felt nausea. I had another radio talk show host up around the panhandle of Florida, near the capital of Florida, called me on the phone the other day. And he said, Chaplain, I'm getting out of here. I said, what do you mean? He said, I got up this morning, walked out the front door. He said, I smell the stuff in the air. He said, the very thing that you're talking about, the toxic gases. He said, I'm leaving. As far as I know, he's already picked up his family and left the panhandle of Florida. These things are so deadly, and they don't have the audacity to tell you about it. Why can't somebody be honest?
Pastor Williams, we have 2 minutes before the mid-show break between hours? And could we continue this after the break?
Yes,
it
we
is
sure can.
But I don't want you to be interrupted in any way, and I do apologize for interrupting you right now, because what you're saying right now is very important. And people in the Gulf right now, let me tell you, we only have a couple of minutes left before mid-show break. I want to tell you this right now. They knew about it, and if you believe what the press is saying about them actually capping the well safely and all, you're not being told the whole story. They're not being honest with you. The thing is, it's still leaking, and it's still leaking at the same amount that it was a long time ago. But we will talk about that after the break, and I want you to try to focus, though, Pastor Williams, at the beginning as to why it is that they are not being honest with us. But we will talk about that after the break. This is Paul Price with the Prophecy Chronicles show. We're about to go on break. We will see you after the beginning of the hour. And hello to every one of you out there in Radio Land. It's Paul Richard Price here with another episode of the Prophecy Chronicles. This is part 2 of our interview with Pastor Lindsey Williams. And while we were going on break, Pastor Williams, were you finished what you were trying to say?
Well, I was talking about the things that the government and BP do not want you to know. What's in the atmosphere? The oil itself is not the most dangerous part of the Gulf of Mexico BP oil disaster. The most dangerous part to human beings is what is getting into the atmosphere, what you're breathing. One hurricane could take these gases all the way up the east coast of America. Someone asked me the other day, they said, is there a safe place in this country? I said, not safe east of the Mississippi. But I'd like to get into something probably even more controversial, more deadly than even those gases that I mentioned a moment ago. And this is something that the media has talked about a little bit, but they probably have not told you the truth. So I'll give you the exact figures as to what's happening here. BP has dumped into the Gulf of Mexico something called Core Exit 9500. They spray this on the ocean water on the top, and in turn it causes the oil to go to the bottom of the ocean. Now, we know how you think you know how much oil is on the top of the Gulf of Mexico. What's under the ocean now, because of this substance called Core Exit that BP has dumped on it, what's at the bottom of the ocean is so horrendous until it's difficult to even imagine it. For instance, BP has dumped, we know, according to their own figures, 1,121,000 gallons of Core Exit 9500. Now, let me try to explain to you what this is. This is a chemical dispersant agent. It causes the oil to sink to the bottom of the ocean. Under the Gulf of Mexico, this is hiding the full extent of the oil, and that's the reason they did it. Now, let me estimate as to what's happening here. Coexit 9500 is a solvent. It's 4 times more toxic than the oil itself. It has a 2.61 ppm toxicity level, and when it's mixed with the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, its molecules are able to phase transition. I hope you're getting these words. So that as a result, here's what happens. The transition involves the change of a liquid into a gaseous state, which can be absorbed by the clouds. The gas will then be released as toxic rain leading to unimaginable environmental catastrophe, and even BP itself admits that it can destroy all life forms from the bottom of the evolutionary chart to the top. Coextic 9500 is a disaster within itself, and the amount of oil that has been taken to the bottom of the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico, it will be lifetimes before it ever is eaten by the algae and the other substances that are there. We are going to see very unusual results because of the coextic that also has been dumped into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, you say, does this really matter? Well, let me give you examples. By the way, Paul mentioned a moment ago when we were on the break, and we were just talking on the telephone amongst ourselves, and he was mentioning that some people have written into the chat room and talked about the DVDs and the CD that I mentioned a moment ago. Folks, the only method that I have of getting out the real story of what's happening is to produce it so you can see it and so that you can put it in the cassette player, CD player of your automobile. Now, the beautiful part about America is that if you don't want to know these facts, then you don't have to dial my 800 toll-free number, and neither do you have to go to the website. That's one of the beauties of America, that nobody's forcing you to do anything. But if you have relatives on the Gulf Coast and in Florida, and you're willing to accept a track record, which Paul gave you my track record a moment ago. In 35 years, I have never said one thing on a radio talk show that was given to me by the elite that it didn't take place in advance exactly like they said it was going to happen. They tell me in advance what bills are going to be passed in Washington. I come on radio talk shows and tell it. This is recorded. I can't get away with saying it happens or it didn't happen. I mean, every single time it has taken place. 2 years ago, one of the elite called me on the phone one day, and he said, Chaplain, the price of crude oil is going from $147 a barrel. You remember it. You were paying $4 a gallon at the gas pump. He said the price of crude oil is going from $147 a barrel to $50 a barrel. I went on radio talk shows all over America, and I placed my reputation on the line. I mean, if what this man told me had failed to come to pass, I would have been the most laughed at person on any radio talk show in America. And 2 months before it happened, I went on major radio talk shows all across this country, and I said the price of gasoline at the gas pumps going to $1.50 a gallon from $4 a gallon. I said the price of crude oil is going from $147 a barrel to $50 a barrel. Actually went to $34 a barrel. And I said it 2 months before it happened, and people laughed at me. I had one Wall Street analyst that happened to be on a program one day with me, and he said, Chaplain, you shouldn't say things like this. He said, you know that can't happen. It would be devastating to the economies of the world. I said, sir, it's going to happen. And 2 months later, when it physically, literally happened, I didn't go back and laugh at the man who had laughed at me on the radio talk show, but my phone almost rang off the hook, and people said, you're a prophet. And I said, no, I'm not a prophet. I just happen to, by the providence of God, have gotten to know some of the elite of the world back numbers of years ago, and from time to time, they call me up and tell me these things. Now, I am trying my best to help you understand the truth. If you don't want to know the truth, you don't have to accept it. And you can go on your way and forget what you hear. But if you want to know the actual fact of what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico, not by what's being told to you by the national media, nor the president, nor the congressman, who haven't got intestinal fortitude enough to tell the American people the truth of what's really happening to them, those who live along the Gulf of Mexico. I've never seen such a bunch of pansies in my life of what we've got in Congress. I hope you throw out every single one of them when the next election comes around. There's not a one of them up there. There's not enough fortitude about them to stand up and tell the American people what the EPA told them about the gases that's coming out of this well and the danger of it all, and the fact that BP can't stop this oil flow and are not going to stop it because they want to bring this well in, they haven't got the intestinal fortitude enough to stand up and tell you that. Well, I'm telling it to you, and if you want to accept it, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So call my 800 number if you want to know the truth, or my toll-free number, and go to my website if you want to know it. That's all I can do is present it to you, and you can take it or leave it. Now, Corexic, extremely dangerous. Why you say is it so dangerous? Let me tell you. You can go to CNN News and see this for yourself. The reporter was Kerry Kennedy, and he mentioned what happened to the workers who cleaned up the oil from the Exxon Valdez oil spill in the Gulf of Alaska in 1989. And I'm going to give you the report exactly as it was given over CNN News. He said, Kerry Kennedy said, the average age, now keep in mind, these were the people that were hired to clean up the mess when the Exxon Valdez, that ship, ran against a rock because the captain of the oil tanker was inebriated, drunk in other words. You're not supposed to use the true words these days, but I will anyway. And as a result, the Exxon Valdez spilled massive amounts of crude oil, not the gases. By the way, that oil had already been filtered, and the gases had been taken out and pumped back into the ground up in Alaska on the North Slope. What's coming out of the ground in the Gulf of Mexico, those gases are coming out into the atmosphere, and everybody around the Gulf and in Florida are breathing them. And the Exxon Valdez, the people who cleaned up that oil spill after the tanker ran aground in 1989, here's the story. The average age of the time of death of a worker who cleaned up after the 1989 Exxon Valdez spill was 51 years of age. Now, back in those days, they allowed them to use rubber gloves, respirators, protective gear. Do you know that if a person shows up to clean up the BP oil spill, and BP is paying them, the people who work out there on those boats that are taking that oil, and so if they come to the job with a respirator on and rubber gloves, they fire them, send them home. They don't want the news media showing those pictures. Now, the people in Alaska who cleaned up after the Exxon Valdez, they wore rubber gloves, they wore respirators, they wore protective gear, and not a single one of them is alive today. They are all dead. Did you hear that? Now, what's going to happen in the Gulf of Mexico when they're not using protective gear, when they're breathing all of the gases, not just coming in contact with toxic oil itself, and those who cleaned up after the Exxon Valdez spill in the Gulf of Alaska, every single worker today is dead. Not a single one of them is alive, and the age that they averaged dying was 51 years of age. Now, what's going to happen to the people around the Gulf of Mexico? You aren't being told a fraction, folks, of what people are facing and the dangers of what's taking place in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, I'll go a step further. You can look this up on the U.S. government website for yourself. And this is dated July the 8th. On the week of July the 8th, the United States Navy moved every warship, every ship of any kind, all personnel. Folks, are you getting this? Yeah, please, go look it up for yourself. The U.S. Navy moved every warship, every personnel, every ship of any kind that they had, they moved them out of the Gulf of Mexico the week of July the 8th. Why? What does the Navy know that you and I don't know? Do they not care whether the soldiers, they were moving them out. They didn't want them to come in contact with these gases and with the toxins that are in the water. Every single United States Navy ship was moved out, and personnel were moved out July the 8th, the week of July the 8th. And the Louisiana State Health Department just came out with this report. It was given on CNN. You can check it for yourself. 162 cases of illness linked to oil spill reports in Louisiana, and they go on to list the symptoms. They list throat irritation, shortness of breath, cough, eye irritation, nausea, headaches, and then they go on down towards the bottom of their report, and they said that 162 people have actually been admitted to hospitals, and that over 2,000 people have been counseled with anxiety, depression, stress, grief, and suicidal tendencies, which are the result of what these gases and the toxins in the Gulf of Mexico are doing. And then just the other day, they came out with this report, and the report was given on July the 6th of this year. They said that now they have confirmed cases of 4 people who have died as a result of swimming in the toxic waters of the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to give you the television station that reported. I'm going to give you the name of the doctor who said it. This is not hearsay, and here it is. Comes from KRIV, Channel 26 in Houston, Texas. It is a Fox station. This report was given on June the 22nd of 2010, and the doctor's name that confirmed this is Dr. Harish, Harish, and I'll spell his last name because I cannot pronounce it, Seethamraju. He is a pulmonary specialist at Methodist Hospital in Houston, Texas, and here are his words. He said, if they take a swim in these waters, the toxic chemicals can cause pneumonia and respiratory failure. We have never seen such enormous amounts of exposure to toxins. The exact words per quote of the doctor. Now, I hope you don't take this for granted. Folks, I've told you where to find out this information. You can get it for yourself and know the truth. There is a media blackout. Literally. They are not telling you the full story of what's happening. And we are facing a disaster in the Gulf of Mexico that is potentially so dangerous that maybe America and the world has never seen anything quite like it, Paul.
And I have a question from the chat room for you, Pastor Lindsay. Rocio wants to know if you know of any of the people, any of the quote experts chemists or oil experts who disagree with your apocalyptic view, and who are they, and what are their best counter-arguments to what you're saying today?
There are no arguments. The people that I was given this by are the top oil people in the world. Everything that I have said, you will find it confirmed by either the Louisiana State Health Department, as I just gave you a moment ago, the United States Navy, from their own website. You can go, if you wish, to the agency that actually listed all of these chemicals in the Gulf of Mexico, if you wish, and prove it for yourself. I hope that you will. Go to NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I've tried to document and back up everything I've said. Senator Bill Nelson said it over NSNBC. Andrea Mitchell show. Folks, everything I've given here is documented fact. I have not given you what Lindsey Williams thinks. I have given you what the elite, the top oil company people of the world, have been willing to confide in me, because you have to understand that this thing is so drastic that there's some people out there who still care enough about human beings to be willing, even though they can't give the information out, they are willing to give me some information because they trust me to give it out, and that's what I have tried my best to do for each of you. As far as disagreement, I have not found one single oil official that has disagreed with the things that you've heard on this program today, Paul?
Well, one thing I want to bring up to you and bring up to my listeners tonight is that there is a issue with a settling methane at the bottom of the Gulf that they're afraid might rise up and create an issue. Now, from what you've heard, what have they thought about the methane problem, and how bad, potentially, Pastor Williams, could this be?
Every oil field is different in the gases that come out of that oil field. At Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, you had very little methane compared to other gases that came out. In the Gulf of Mexico, they consider this oil field that has been penetrated to be what they call a young field. Now, methane will come out of a young field in a much larger amount and percentage than it would in what they call an older oil field. Because of this, there are massive amounts of methane. Now, do you understand what methane is? Let me try to explain. What you use in your house, if you wanted natural gas to cook your food, is not methane, but it is similar to methane. It is an explosive gas. And you know what happens when you turn on the propane stove in your house to cook your food? Well, in the Gulf of Mexico, you have millions and millions and millions of cubic feet of this explosive gas that is coming out of this well. It comes out in many different forms, and it gets into the atmosphere. After a while, it can form massive bubbles. And the fear of some is, and I cannot say what's going to happen, don't you dare say that Lindsey Williams said on this program that there's going to be an explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. Nobody knows that. Nobody has told me that. I have heard rumors of that. They know the methane gas is there. This is no secret. But what's going to happen as a result of that methane gas being there in massive amounts is anybody's guess. Whether it will ever be exploded or not, nobody knows. But there is the potential of that methane bubble explosion in the Gulf of Mexico because of the youngness of the oil field that they've drilled into and the massive amounts of methane gas that has been in the atmosphere and in the water. Paul?
Well, and plus another thing, when we're talking about benzene and all the other particular chemicals being released that are highly toxic and carcinogen, we can look at what it can do to human life, to animal life, the mutations that could occur, the illness and all. Are we looking at, in effect, Pastor Williams, what could be what the Bible talks about in the book of Revelation about the Babylon the Great? It has been rumored that in the book of Revelation, when they're talking about Babylon the Great, that they are actually referring possibly to the United States. And if so, could this be what the Bible may have talked about and what John talked about in the book of Revelation? And about wormwood in the water and such. Are we looking at the possible trigger event that could bring forth the end of the age?
Paul, I have been a minister of the gospel for 40 years. I'm not a young fellow. In my Bible study, in the book of Revelation, I find that it says that the oceans would be turned to a red color as blood. I know in the Gulf of Mexico that the oil has a reddish tint. Some of you have seen the pictures. If you've been on any kind of media that's been willing to tell you at least half of the story, you've seen the pictures and you go on the internet and see them readily, that the water has a reddish color. And many have said to me, is this not the fulfillment of that in the Gulf of Mexico? And my answer has been emphatically, no, it is not. Because in the Scriptures, it says that this event, when the oceans will turn to a reddish color such as blood, that it will be during the tribulation, and we're not in the tribulation yet. It also said that it is done by 2 witnesses. Now, read your scriptures. Let's not try to suppose something here. There's one thing that all of you will find out. When you listen to me on a radio talk show, or you see any of my DVDs, or you happen to read my books, I've written 6 of them, and you will find out that I never say, I think so, I hope so, this possibly could be. I'll tell you the facts, and then you make up your mind. In the book of Revelation, the oceans turn to a reddish color, and the 2 witnesses do it. The 2 witnesses aren't here yet, and we aren't in the tribulation yet. We may be seeing a foreshadowing of these events already in the Gulf of Mexico, but this is not the fulfillment from the book of Revelation. Now, you ask about the question of America, and could America possibly be fulfilling these things about Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation? Well, personally, now I'm just speaking for myself personally, in my 40 years, actually 50 years now, of Bible study, I know I can find a number of places where I think America might be in the Bible, but I cannot, honestly, in all sincerity, I cannot guarantee you any place in the Bible that the United States of America is found. Now, I know some Bible scholars say they can, and I have no qualms with them whatsoever, but I don't know where America's going to be in the end. I know there may be some references there that people try to conjure up America, and maybe they can find it satisfactorily to them. To me, I'm not quite so sure that America will even be the great power that it is today during the tribulation period. Paul?
Well, and I agree with that. I don't find anywhere in the Bible where it states, especially in the final book of Revelation, that John stated anywhere that the United States was a country. And one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I will tell you this about this Gulf oil debacle, is that the elitists have been pushing a eugenics policy, especially here in the United States. And one of the ways to do it is to allow this to go on for as long as it has, and hopefully when we get a certain weather pattern, whether it be a hurricane or whatever, to boil this thing up and take it into the atmosphere. Once it starts raining down, we're looking at a possibility, Pastor Williams, of it raining down death on the United States. Now, I'm not predicting that, anyone, but there is a possibility that could occur. And if it does, it would fulfill what they have been trying to do for so many years, and that is population or depopulation of the United States. And what I like to do is to ask you, what do you think about that? And do you think that this could be being allowed to happen so they can fulfill what they believe is their destiny?
You know, Paul, there are certain things that the elite won't talk with me about. Now, I honestly mean this. I ask them questions whenever I'm on the phone with them. And they say certain things, and then certain things they just positively won't talk about. Now, the elite are very powerful people. And if they don't want to answer one of my questions on a phone call, they just positively don't do it. But I try to maintain a rapport with them. And there's one thing that I have never been able to get them to talk about, and that's population control. There are a few other things that they won't talk about. And so I really can't answer that question because I don't know what they'll do. I do know this, and I have been assured by certain sources that even though this Gulf of Mexico oil disaster was an accident, I assure you this was not done intentionally. BP did not intend for this thing to blow up. They intended to bring in an oil well that would make them as rich as Russia and to get into a major oil field in a super deep well. They instead hit something so catastrophic that they could not control it, and as a result, they are in the mess they're in today. It was an accident, let me assure you of that. Now, even though it was an accident, I have been assured by certain sources that the elite will use the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster in order to fulfill their 2012 timeline. And I haven't gone into that timeline tonight, and I won't because we don't have that much time. It'd take me 2 hours just to deal with that timeline alone. But they do. They have given me everything they're going to do between now and 2012. And I recorded it. I recorded it back about a year ago on DVDs. I gave charts. I gave examples. I gave visual interpretations. You've never seen anything like this before. Put on DVD. I put it on 6 different DVDs. And people, I did it, and I said, here's what's going to happen a year from now. Here's what's going to happen 2 years from now. Here's what's going to happen in 2012. The elite have told me. I said it a year ago, and everything that they said was going to take place in the past 12 months has taken place. Let me give an example, just so that you'll understand that I'm not talking off the top of my hat tonight. I lived with the elite of the world for 3 years' time. I was their chaplain on the Trans-Alaska oil field. It gained an element of respect that some of these people who now are retired are willing to tell me some things. And back about a year and a half ago, I was on the phone with one of them. And at the time, as you remember, everybody thought we were going to war with Iran right then. In fact, I had even been saying myself there's a possibility of war with Iran a year and a half ago. And radio talk show hosts, everybody, everywhere, oh, we're fixing to go to war with Iran. We're just about to have war with Iran. Well, I was on the phone with one of these elitists, and I said, what about Iran? I said, are we going to have war with Iran soon? Now, you'll find this recorded on my DVDs. You don't have to say that I can't prove this. It was recorded on radio talk shows all across America. And the elitists said to me, Chaplain, we are not going to have war with Iran right now. I said, but our warships are over there. Our aircraft carriers are over there. Even our president is talking about war with Iran. I said, you say we're not going to have war with Iran? He said, no, we positively will not. And I gave the date that they gave me that they wanted war with Iran, but I said on radio talk shows all over America, we are not going to have war with Iran for the next year to a year and a half. Now, it came to pass just that way. All the talk show hosts, everybody that was predicting we were going to have it right then, it didn't happen. I knew it wasn't going to happen because the elite told me they weren't ready. You mean to tell me, Chaplain, you think that the elite calls war? You better believe they do. War is to their profit. They have everything to gain and money to make by having war. And they have already told me when we're going to have war with Iran. Now, all of these things I have told as they have told them to me. And every time over the past 35 years, they're right. Now, they are going to use this Gulf of Mexico oil disaster for the purpose of fulfilling their 2012 timeline. What is their 2012 timeline? I describe it in 8 hours of DVD viewing. I couldn't possibly give it all to you right here, but I will give you a little bit. One of them said to me one day, he said, Chaplain, within 2 years, you will not recognize the United States of America. He said again to me one day, he said, Chaplain, he said, nearly everybody, now, folks, this was a year ago, year and a half ago before it happened. He said, Chaplain, nearly everybody is going to be working for the government within the next 2 years. Do you realize that everybody that works for General Motors is an employee of the federal government? Everybody who works for Chrysler Corporation is an employee of the federal government. Do you realize that every doctor, every dentist, every hospital worker, every nurse in the United States of America, when health care goes into full force, will be an employee of the government of the United States of America? Folks, they planned this back 4 or 5 years ago. They told me what they were going to do. I knew it was going to happen, and it's taking place exactly as they said it would. Nothing happens by chance. Everything happens by design. And even though they did not plan the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster, even though it was an accident, they are going to use this scenario in the Gulf of Mexico to help them fulfill their 2012 timeline, which is very extensive of what they're going to do. So, Paul, you've heard me talk about the timeline before, and they know exactly what they'll do by 2012, Paul.
Well, and I have a question about that right now from in the chat room from Lily, who has asked, let me go up here, what do they have to say, what is the finale for 2012 is what she wants to know, briefly if you have time.
Well, with the elite, the year 2012 is very important. One of them told me one day, he said, Chaplain, by 2012 the dollar will be dead. I said, then how can we possibly protect ourselves and our assets if the dollar is going to be dead by 2012? And then it was really comical what he said. He said, Chaplain, do you know what our currency is? Now, folks, you need to understand this. The elite don't depend on paper. They have a little bit. But no, they do not depend on paper. He said to me, Chaplain, anything that's written on a piece of paper is worth the paper it's written on. And I said, please, I'm not quite understanding. I said, the housing market, you can't buy a house and depend on its price anymore. I said, the dollar, it's worth less every day. Go to the grocery store and look at the price of groceries and hardware going up. I said, what can we possibly spare our assets with? He said, Chaplain, there's only one thing. He said, that's our currency. I said, but what is your currency? You ready? Here it is. You'll never get this, folks, from anywhere except from the elite. And by the way, I do not sell gold and silver. You couldn't buy any from me if you tried. So I'm not saying this for the sake of selling you anything. He said to me, Chaplain, our currency is gold and silver. He said, is the only thing whereby you can maintain your assets. He said, don't depend on paper. He said, if it's a piece of paper, it's worth the paper it's written on. Folks, you cannot trust the stock market. You cannot trust the dollar. You cannot trust your retirement account. You cannot trust Social Security. America is bankrupt. You cannot trust paper of any kind whatsoever. And they advised me, they said, Chaplain, if you want to maintain yourself, get out of paper. He said, don't be in anything paper. They have a 2012 timeline in which they intend to draw the strings, so to speak. They intend to do nearly everything necessary by 2012, whereby we will be under their control. You know, if I could take everything that the elite have told me, Paul, and narrow it down to one expression, I would put it into this. The name of the game is control. Some of the people that I rubbed shoulders with when I was the chaplain to the elite for 3 years' time, some of those people had so much money that they could have written a check for $1 million a day for the rest of their life and never spent all their money. That is not the main issue, even though money is an issue with them. The higher up you get in the elite, the less and less money is an issue. With them, everything is control of humanity, control of government, control of Congress, control of the president, control of every issue in America. With the elite, the name of the game is control of humanity and people down through all of the ages. This is what the tyrants, the Hitlers, the Mussolinis, it's a control factor with the elite, not just dollars and cents. And they will use this Gulf of Mexico oil disaster for the purpose of helping them to fulfill their 2012 timeline, which is very intricate and involved. And you need to understand these things. One of them said to me one day on the phone, he used the expression, the devil's Messiah. Now, I know I'm going into some things here that no way I can describe it even in 15 minutes. I took 20 minutes just to describe this on my DVDs. And I said, sir, what do you mean by the devil's Messiah? You see, the elite, they're quite different than what the average person thinks about them. These are not drunken brawlers that curse all the time and carry on like I hear some people doing. These people, if you met them on the street, you wouldn't recognize them from anybody else walking down that street. And I have never seen one of them do some of the things that I see average people doing. I mean, the elite have a different mindset. They have a different life pattern than the average person. They understand the intricacies of all of this. And I said, what do you mean by the devil's Messiah? He said, Chaplain, in order to bring America to the position that it is right now, we had to take away America's God. Oh, my goodness. I stayed on this subject for probably 20 to 30 minutes with this man, and he went into details as to what they have done in the textbooks and the schools of America, what they've done to the churches of America, how they've changed America from a republic to a democracy. These people knew exactly what they were doing. They began this years ago. And in order to bring America to the place it is right now where they can totally control it, they had to take away the God of the Constitution and the Founding Fathers and to give us what they've given us today. You need to understand the mindset of these elite, and you'll never do it unless you know someone who knows them personally and is willing to tell you the story. And I have tried to do that the best I can, in honesty, to tell you just what the elite are like. Folks, you need to set your spiritual house in order. You need to read the Bible and understand the precepts and how that the elite do what they do. You need to understand the God of this world, the prince of the power of this air, whom is the God of the elite. The elite have a God. They're not atheists. I never met an atheist amongst the elite. There may be some, but I never met them. They have a God. It's the prince of the power of this air. It's the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. They're religious people in their own right, but not the kind of religion that you and I know, belief in the Word of God and salvation through Jesus Christ. This is not their God. You need to understand these people and to be able to stay a step ahead of them. So I would beg of you, set your spiritual house in order. Get things right. Know that your life is on a solid rock and not on sinking sand. And if you're interested in knowing all of the story, please go to my website and you'll find my 6 DVDs, 8 hours of professionally viewing DVDs, graphs, charts, visual interpretations. Please go on the website to prophecyclub.com and find a description of these things. That's prophecyclub.com, or go to our toll-free number. And oh, by the way, whenever you call our toll-free number, you'll talk with an American operator. You won't hear somebody from China or India or Mexico. You'll hear an American voice on that telephone. That's all we use. And our toll-free number is 888-799-6111. If you would like the real story, be sure and get my documentary on the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster, everything that the elite plan to do between now and 2012, and you'll find it all there if you wish to know and stay a step ahead of the elite. And Paul, you may have a few more questions there. If so, we have just a few more minutes to take some of them.
Well, we only have about 2 minutes left, and we had one more question, but I'll try to make it brief, if you would. Okay, let me go back up here. Do the elite control the Pope, or is the Pope one of the elite?
I have not the slightest idea. I've never talked with them about it. A person did ask me the other day, do the elite control China? I said, sure they do. They were the ones that made China what they are today. China was a closed society back before Bush Sr. became the ambassador to China, And, oh, my goodness, that'd take a whole program right there for me to tell you why China is the superpower they are today. Somebody said to me the other day, do the elite control Russia? I said, sure they do. I mean, every bit of this, you have to understand the mindset of these people in order to get it. And sure, all of these things are under their control. They have them well under control.
Well, and I want to thank you again for being on the show tonight, and I want to let my listeners know that it was my show tonight that Pastor Williams decided to be on, even though he went into a self-imposed moratorium for a little while, and I want to thank you again for opening up to my audience. It's been fun, and I hope to have you again on the show soon.
Paul, thank you very much. Lord bless you. And I appreciate the privilege of being on your show to tell the real story of what's happening.
Okay, and another thing, we're going to have part 2 next week with Jerry Pippin and with Mark McCandlish in a panel discussion about what may also happen. This was part 1 with Lindsey Williams. Part 2 of the Gulf Leak Alert will be on next week with both Mark McCandlish and Jerry Pippin. And I want to thank all of you for listening to the show. We've had a diverse audience with diverse opinions. Thank you again. And remember, you will find the truth here. What you do with it is up to you. Thank you again for listening. Thank you again, Pastor Williams. And all of you, until next week, have a good night, and God bless.